Coming up on New Day at Arirang. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has warned North Korea may be preparing for a nuclear test. He says one of the tunnel entrances at the nuclear test site at Punggye-ri has been reopened, possibly in preparation for such a test. President Yoon during his Memorial Day speech on Monday vowed to sternly respond to any further North Korean provocations and establish greater fundamental security capability for South Korea. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson survives a no-confidence vote from his own Conservative Party on Monday. In winning the vote, Johnson is safe from another confidence challenge for a year, but the narrow victory could weaken his leadership.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Tuesday, June 7th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Woo Seung.
And I'm Yoo Seung-jae. Thanks for joining us this morning, because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Now, our top story this morning, the UN nuclear watchdog has predicted that North Korea may be preparing to conduct its first nuclear test since 2017.
This comes as the U.S. State Department has also expressed concerns over the possibility that the regime could conduct its 7th nuclear test. Kim Yo-sun has more.
The chief of the IAEA has expressed concerns that North Korea may be preparing for a nuclear test. Addressing the agency's Board of Governors on Monday, Director General Rafael Grossi explained that one of the tunnel entrances at the nuclear test site in Punggye-ri, in the north of the country, has been reopened as part of possible preparations for a nuclear test. He added that this was consistent with similar activity for previous nuclear tests in North Korea. He further noted that a nuclear test goes against the UN Security Council and would cause serious concern. In related news, the U.S. State Department has also raised concern over the possibility that the North could conduct a nuclear test in the near future. Speaking to journalists on Monday, State Department spokesperson Ned Price called the situation something that Washington has warned of for some time, adding that it is a contingency that the U.S. has been planning for. Against his backdrop, a senior U.S. official highlighted that Washington and its two closest Asian allies, Seoul and Tokyo, remain ready to counter any threat posed by the North. Speaking during a forum jointly hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies and Korea Foundation, Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Daniel Crittenbrink, however, commented that the door to diplomacy remains open. He further added that the U.S. does and will not link its humanitarian assistance for the North to progress in denuclearization talks with the regime. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
President Yoon attended South Korea's Memorial Day ceremony on Monday. During his speech, he pledged to respond sternly to any further North Korean provocations and beef up South Korea's capability. Heung-min reports.
President Yoon took his first Memorial Day speech as president to send a message of firm and stern response to any North Korean provocation. Marking the nation's 67th Memorial Day, the day after North Korea launched a barrage of short-range ballistic missiles in what's probably its largest single test, the new South Korean leader noted that the North's missile and nuclear weapons programs have reached a level where they pose a threat to regional and world peace.
우리 정부는 북한의 어떠한 도발에도 단호하고 엄정하게 대처할 것입니다. 북한의 핵과 미사일 위협을 억제하면서 보다 근본적이고 실질적인 안보 능력을 갖춰 나갈 것입니다.
Yoon's remarks also come on the heels of South Korea and the U.S. military's launch of 8th ballistic missiles into the sea early Monday morning in a show of force matching the North Korean missile display the previous day. The new commander-in-chief also vowed to strengthen policies for veterans and their families and establish a fair and reasonable veterans system, as it is the state's duty to take care of the families left behind.
자유와 번영을 이룩한 나라의 국민은 조국을 위해 희생하고 헌신한 이들을 정성껏 예우해 왔습니다. 제복 입은 영웅들이 존경받는 나라를 만들어야 합니다.
After presenting national merits to 5 people, President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gun-hee wrapped up the day with a visit to the Central Veterans Hospital in eastern Seoul to meet and thank the Korean War and Vietnam War veterans hospitalized and treated there. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
In response to North Korea's missile launches on Sunday, South Korea and the United States staged their own show of force. The allies fired 8 surface-to-surface missiles towards the EC before the crack of dawn. Heung-min reports.
Explosions light up the night sky, and missiles are launched off the east coast of South Korea. At 4:45 a.m. Korea time, South Korea and the U.S. jointly fired a total of 8 surface-to-surface Army Tactical Missile System missiles toward the East Sea. 7 of them were reportedly fired by South Korea and 1 by the U.S. They were fired over a period of just 10 minutes in response to North Korea's missile launches the previous day. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said this shows the military has the capability to accurately target the source of North Korea's missile launches or their command and support centers, even if the regime fires missiles from various locations. On Sunday, North Korea fired 8 short-range ballistic missiles toward the East Sea from 4 different places. These were the Sunan area located in Pyongyang, where the regime has its main airfield, Dongchangri, Gaechon, and Hamhung. The distances the missiles flew for range from about 110 kilometers to 670 kilometers, and their altitudes reached roughly 25 kilometers to 90 kilometers. South Korea's military also strongly condemned the North's recent series of ballistic missile launches and called on the regime to immediately halt actions that raise tensions on the Korean peninsula. The South's move comes after President Yoon, who took office last month, vowed to take a tougher line against the North than the previous administration. Heung-min, Arirang News.
Now, senior officials from 7 countries, including South Korea, held talks on Monday during a vice ministerial meeting presided over by the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. Now, the counterparts from South Korea, the U.S., Australia, India, Japan, New Zealand, and Vietnam exchanged views on the global response to COVID-19, as well as the newly established Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Second Vice Foreign Minister Lee Do-hoon highlighted South Korea's efforts to launch a new global biomanufacturing training hub and promote vaccine development. He also called for countries to cooperate so the Indo-Pacific region can prosper under IPEF. Now, wars and export bans have recently prevented grains from reaching their destinations. Now, this has made food prices soar and raises the question, what if such events mean our food supply gets cut off in the future? Well, the spike in international food prices has made us look more at South Korea's sinking self-sufficiency in food. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us how dire our food self-sufficiency status is and what this country or we as individuals should do to tackle this both in the short term and the long term.
We might have plenty of food on our plates and think that South Korea will never be short of food. But that assumption could be wrong.
그러나 만약에 우리나라에 어떤 비상사태가 발생했다. 우리가 경제 제재를 받게 됐거나 전쟁 같은 게 일어났다. 그러면 지금 2개월 이내에 우리나라에 먹을 게 없어져. 전쟁이 한 2개월만 지속되면 한국 사람은 무기로 전투에 지는 게 아니라 먹을 게 없어서 전쟁을 포기해요. 이게 굉장히 위험한 일이거든요.
An expert's desperate warning on the need to secure food supplies. Food security means that all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food which meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. Then what is the level of South Korea's food security? The food self-sufficiency rate for staple grains, rather than grains for animal feed, was at just 45.8% in 2020, dropping severely from over 80% in 1970. When feed grains are included, it gets even worse. The sufficiency rate stood at 19.3% in 2020, falling below the 20% mark for the first time. Compared to other major countries, we can see how low it is.
The situation is the most dire for wheat, with a sufficiency rate that's under 1%.
Korea's low self-sufficiency rate for wheat. What is the reason behind this? Of course, cultivating crops is tricky as low temperatures can hinder growth, while damage from pests is also a factor. But an expert says these issues are easy to overcome, saying the biggest problem is actually the price gap between domestic and imported wheat.
대표님, 아무래도 이 최대 수출국들의 수출 금지 규제나 또는 전쟁 때문에 이제 수입산 밀의 가격이 많이 올랐잖아요. 그만큼 국내산 밀의 수요나 가격이 또 긍정적인 영향을 받은 것이 있나요?
그러게요. 지금 작년 대비 올해 그 전쟁이나 수출 금지로 인해 가지고 한 50%에서 60% 정도 수입밀이 이렇게 인상된 것 같아요. 그렇지만 국내산 밀과 가격 차이는 아직도 2배 정도. 지금 국내산은 한 1,000원 정도 지금 유지하고 있거든요. 그러면 그 가격 차이 때문에 아직은 업체들에서도 국내산 밀에 이렇게 눈을 돌리고 있는 것은 보이지 않습니다.
The best way to tackle the problem, of course, is to increase production, have more farms grow wheat. The new Yoon administration, realizing the urgency of the matter, has announced plans to bring up the wheat self-sufficiency rate to 7% by 2027. The government has been buying wheat through the Industry Promotion Act since 2021, where it makes contracts with farms in advance to boost wheat cultivation. The purchase price is a little over $30 for 40 kilograms of wheat, while the imported wheat price is less than $15. Some say increasing the domestic wheat purchase price would be the answer, but farmers say giving incentives could be a better solution.
Production costs are twice as expensive, naturally leading to a price gap between processed products. If the purchase price goes up, it's a burden for companies as the price competitiveness goes down. Instead of raising the purchase price, the government should come up with incentives.
Of course, producing more grains is the direct solution to the food security crisis. But it might take years, perhaps decades, for grain production to reach a high enough level. Another way to tackle the food security crisis is to store the food. Currently, the government and the Korea Agro-Fisheries and Food Trade Corporation store grains at 14 storage bases.
I'm at one of the 14 storage bases located in Jangseong-gun County of Jeollanam-do Province. This is where reserves of wheat, sesame seeds, and beans are kept. In this room alone, there are 800 tons of wheat, all divided into 1-ton sacks.
네, 단장님, 여기 밀 비축기지 들어오니까 약간 으스스해요. 이거 왜 그런 건가요?
그것은 밀 품질 관리를 위해서 온도를 10도씨 정도로 유지하고 습도도 50% 정도 유지하고 있기 때문에 그렇습니다. 저희들이 품질 관리를 위해서 월 1회 검사를 실시하고 있습니다.
In order to strengthen the self-sufficiency infrastructure for wheat, the government is gradually increasing the amount purchased, aiming to have 30,000 tons of wheat stored by 2025. Currently, when there are not enough storage facilities, private storage bases are often used. To expand grain reserves, more bases are needed.
If the wheat reserves are expanded, it will be difficult to store all of that in our 14 bases. And to have a variety of kinds of grain stored, there should be specific facilities for each category of grain.
Storing grains is one way to improve food security. Another way to tackle the issue at an individual level is to reduce food waste.
지금 어마어마한 음식물 쓰레기 양이 이 트럭을 통해서 계속 들어오고 있거든요. 하루에 평균적으로 몇 톤 정도 계속 들어오고 있나요?
성남시에서만 일일 200에서 210톤 정도 반입이 되고 있고요. 이걸 연간으로 환산하면 7만 2천 톤에서 7만 5천 톤 정도 반입이 되고 있습니다.
And that's just from Seongnam City of Gyeonggi-do Province. A total of 5.16 million tons of food waste were produced nationwide in 2020. That's around 14,000 tons a day. Most food waste gets turned into animal feed or fertilizer, but before this, alien substances need removing, and the waste needs to be dried and sterilized.
Processing costs differ for each facility. We spend around $48 to $50, but other places spend up to $96. This cost is also rising due to lots of factors, including high inflation.
Processing all this waste costs around $650 million a year. So how can we reduce food waste? First, we need to minimize the amount of food thrown away before it expires. Sell-by dates show until what date food can be sold, but food can be eaten safely after this date. Adding a use-by date would help reduce the amount of edible food mistakenly thrown away by consumers. South Korea is going to introduce use-by dates from next January. Restaurants and cafeterias should reduce food waste too. Seoul City Hall's cafeteria recently introduced an AI food scanner to measure how much food is needed. Another weight-saving piece of technology is the radio frequency identification, or RFID waste bin, which charges households a fee depending on the amount of waste they throw into it, encouraging people to reduce food waste. Bringing up the self-sufficiency rate, increasing the number of storage facilities to allow larger food reserves, reducing food waste. All of these efforts need to start with the realization that we need to prepare for food security crisis. 김보경, 아리랑 뉴스.
And it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into key issues in the spotlight right now. Today, June 7th, is World Food Safety Day. It's a day to draw attention and mobilize action to prevent, detect, and manage foodborne risks and improve human health.
As summer marks the season where food poisoning and other food-related illnesses are prevalent, what are some things that we need to be aware of? Now, for this, we're today joined by David Kwak, Clinical Assistant Professor at the International Clinic of Suncheonang University Hospital in Seoul. Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Kwak. Now, first off, what kind of foodborne illnesses are the most prevalent around this time of year, and what are some symptoms that we really need to watch out for?
Right, so there are different sources that can cause foodborne illnesses throughout the year, but most commonly we find bacterial sources to be more prevalent during the summer months, and it's primarily because of the warm weather and humidity that happens during the summer, which allows the better conditions for these bacteria to grow on the food materials. So the bacteria that are on the food not only grows themselves, but it can also create a material called toxins. And toxins are actually something that is different from the infection itself, because when even the bacteria is eradicated, the toxins can still remain on the food sources. So when it gets into the mouths of human beings, it infects them or it intoxicates them. Obviously, the general symptoms that are to be watched out for usually contain something of diarrhea, or some people can have vomiting, but also some of the more severe consequences that people should keep an eye on is dehydration and fever, and possibly blood in their stool materials, because those are the signs that people need, that calls for people to come into the hospital and be checked out for.
I guess one of the most common illnesses is food poisoning. I want to know how serious food poisoning is, and is it something that a patient needs to absolutely go to the hospital for, or is it something that you can simply just treat at home?
Usually, and most commonly, we probably already have been through once or twice of food poisoning before in our lifetime. Usually, it only involves a very mild diarrhea or mild nausea, or even in more extreme cases, vomiting. And that usually are eradicated within about a couple to 3 days or so. But if the symptoms were to stay to an extent which can make the infected person dehydrated, let's say too much vomiting or too much diarrhea that makes the person dehydrated, or if there was to be a case where a person is actually seeing blood on inside their stools, and or if the vomiting is to extent that the person is actually feeling dizzy, or if the symptoms overall are staying more than 3 days or so, those are some call signs that people need to go into the hospital and be checked out for. There are sometimes, rarely, but sometimes bacterial sources that need to be treated with antibiotics. Usually it's really never the case, but the symptoms that I just mentioned, those are specific signs that are caused by these bacterial sources that needs to be treated medically.
And are there any foods that we should be avoiding in particular during the summertime in order to stay safe from such foodborne illnesses?
Well, in one word, the summary is that food that are uncooked is something that needs to be monitored very closely. For example, in the situation very commonly happening in Korea, the food that are left out before being sold to customers, such as fried rice, or other sandwiches. So the foods that are pre-made but being kept on the outside for, let's say, a couple of hours before being sold are some of the things that can grow bacteria very easily. So those are the food types that are that needs to be taken care with more careful of. But other sources, let's say in household matters, we need to make sure to separate raw food materials from cooked materials, because there are chances that can transmit these bacterial sources to the cooked food before being consumed. Also, the food materials obviously need to be refrigerated very properly, because in cold temperatures, it is much less likely for these bacteria to grow on the food materials.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always been told is not to eat kimbap during the summer days, especially when it's left out, right? But another thing that's very popular here in the country these days, food trucks, right? And especially with all the return of the outdoor festivals, there's all the more and more selling a variety of foods through these food trucks and stalls. Should consumers be careful about food trucks and other food stalls during the summertime as well?
Well, in that regard, I'd say we should be careful of any restaurants or food venues, regardless of what types they are. As long as they cook the food right in front of you, or as long as they keep the food materials refrigerated, and also as long as they sanitize their utensils and their hands before cooking the meals, there is no reason to really worry more than the others about the safety of food consumptions from that specific venue. But I guess in reality, the food trucks tends to be more exposed to outside sources, and when it gets hectic in time, they tend to really be have the food ready, pre-made before all these customers come in and whatnot. So I guess we need to take certain steps before consuming foods from there. But I wouldn't necessarily say that food trucks are more dangerous than the others, as long as they keep all these sanitizing measures properly.
Well, thank you very much for your insights today, Dr. Kwak. We're looking forward to speaking with you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that's going to wrap up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around. We have more coming your way in the second half, so we'll be back in just a moment.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean new day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis, a pledge to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
넌 볼 수 없고 가질 수 없어 뚝뚝 눈물 쏟아내도 뜨거운 자태 한번 비추지 않고 내게만 까칠한 그녀는 유명한 서울의 별다 어딨나 In your eye 걔와 함께면 넌 디스토피아 내 발걸음 따라오면 유토피아 나의 I feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever.
And welcome back to the second half of New Day at Arirang. Now, the first possible monkeypox case in Washington, D.C. has been identified in a resident who recently traveled to Europe.
Local health authorities said the individual was confirmed positive for orthopox, the family of viruses that includes monkeypox. They added that the samples have been collected and sent to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for further testing. According to the CDC, around 25 monkeypox cases have been identified in at least 11 states so far. And this news comes as the World Health Organization says that 780 monkeypox cases have been reported from 27 non-endemic countries. South Korea's foreign exchange reserves dropped in May for a third month in a row. The Bank of Korea said on Tuesday that the foreign exchange reserves, a barometer of financial stability, stood at around $448 billion at the end of May. This is a fall of about $1.6 billion from April, despite the weakening of the dollar affecting non-dollar assets. The BOK said that the foreign reserve declined as more assets were sold to stabilise the exchange rate. Around 90% of the country's foreign reserves are in the form of securities. As of the end of April, South Korea's reserves were the 9th largest in the world. China had the most reserves, followed by Japan.
Now, cargo truckers here in South Korea went out on strike on Tuesday to demand freight rate hikes as well as the extension of the safe trucking freight rate system. The system guarantees minimum freight rates for drivers until the end of this year. Most of the 25,000-strong Cargo Trucker Solidarity Union, as well as some non-members, have joined the walkout. The strike is set to last for an unspecified period of time. Meanwhile, the government held a meeting on Monday to discuss a response to the strike, including measures to maintain the transport system. Now, South Korea defeated Chile 2-0 on Monday in a tune-up ahead of the 2022 Qatar World Cup. Wolverhampton forward Hwang Hee-chan scored just 12 minutes into the match to give the Taeguk Warriors a 1-0 first-half lead. Captain Heung-min, marking his entry into the FIFA Century Club, scored from a brilliant free kick, helping South Korea win. His latest goal was his 32nd international strike in 100 matches. The South Korean side will host Paraguay on Friday, followed by Egypt next Tuesday.
It's time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Seoul and Washington fired 8 missiles from South Korea on Monday, demonstrating the Allies' deterrence and capability against threats from North Korea. And this show of force followed North Korea's firing of 8 missiles the day before, when it launched short-range ballistic missiles and new tactical guided weapons from 4 different locations. President Yoon said that he would respond firmly and sternly to nuclear and missile threats from the North, which he said were advancing by the day. And the South and the US believe that the North will soon hold a nuclear test, which would be its 7th since 2006 and the first of its kind since September 2017, when it claimed to have successfully tested a thermonuclear bomb to fit on its ICBMs. We discussed the latest developments today with Min Jong-un, professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Very warm welcome to you, Professor Min. It's lovely to see you. And, well, my first question, North Korea, it fired 8 missiles on Sunday morning into the East Sea from 4 locations. And, well, it's quite unusual to fire 8 rounds all at once. And, of course, this also marks the regime's 18th provocation of the year. And it took place right after the 3-day joint military exercise between South Korea and the United States. So, really, what do you make of this timing, the timing of North Korea's Sunday launch?
Yes, good morning, and thanks for having me today. And for your first question, as you mentioned, North Korea fired 8 short-range ballistic missiles toward the East Sea on Sunday, and it was just 1 day after South Korea and U.S. had the joint drills near the Korean Peninsula involving a U.S. aircraft carrier. And regarding the joint drills, it was the first time for the allies, South Korea and U.S., to have mobilized a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier during the exercise since November 2017. And North Korea has been highly sensitive to such a joint military exercise by the allies, and it described it as a rehearsal for invasion to North Korea. So it seems that North Korea launched 8 ballistic missiles in order to express its complaints and anger, possibly, about the allies going back to the largest scale joint military exercise this time. In addition, I also think that by shooting several ballistic missiles at the different locations, it seems that North Korea tried to show that its missile capabilities are superior to the allies' defense posture.
And Professor Min, well, some believe that the North's firing of 8 missiles is to develop tactics to break through the Korean missile defense, as launching 2 or more missiles from the launching missiles from 2 or more origins at the same time. That would severely weaken the chances of intercepting them. Do you agree with this kind of interpretation, and do you think this launch was directed at South Korea this time rather than the US?
Well, I don't agree with the argument that the launching the missiles at the same time could weaken the defensive posture of South Korea. Of course, theoretically, it is possible to assume that shooting missiles from several locations at the same time, or a little bit different time gap, could increase the chance of breaking the missile defense system. But generally speaking, South Korea's military capabilities are far more superior or better than that of North Korea, and therefore it would not be easy for North Korean missiles to fly over South Korean territory. It's mainly because they will be detected right after they are launched from the North Korean territory by the South Korean military radar, and they will be gone before crossing the inter-Korean border. In addition, the missiles, the shooting sites, and the facilities in North Korea will also be destroyed by South Korean missiles. And then I think North Korea should know that shooting missiles to South Korean territory is a clear signal that it began the serious military operation against South Korea, and therefore it should be responsible for conducting such irrevocable military action on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea will definitely make sure that Pyongyang will pay for its decision. In addition, Kim Jong-un regime should keep it in mind that the new South Korean government will never make any compromise with Pyongyang, unlike its predecessor, like Moon Jae-in government, while North Korea continues to make reckless provocations. So I hope that North Korea will not waste time anymore and just come back to the nuclear talks with the US for its own people.
And Professor Min, well, it seems that the North used short-range ballistic missiles and new tactical guided weapons, including the KN-23 and 24, as well as 25, which could be equipped with nuclear warheads. And, well, there's been all this talk about an imminent nuclear test at 7th, if it happens. And what kind of progress do you think it would have made by that point?
Well, I think that North Korea is ready to conduct another nuclear test. It means that the 7th nuclear test will be able to take place at any time soon, according to Kim Jong-un's decisions, based on its domestic political considerations and its calculations about the relationship with the US and South Korea. And regarding the upcoming nuclear test, it seems that North Korea want to make technological advancements in nuclear capabilities, specifically in order to put tactical nuclear warheads on the short-range ballistic missiles. And enhancing its short-range ballistic missile capabilities mainly target its neighboring countries like South Korea and Japan, not the United States. So it shows that the main purpose of conducting another nuclear test is to enhancing North Korea's nuclear capabilities against South Korea and Japan. And meanwhile, North Korea will also try to enhance its military capabilities against the United States through improving its ICBM capabilities. It means that there is a high probability that it will have another ICBM test after conducting the 7th nuclear test in order to increase its bargaining power on US before it attempts to resume the nuclear talks with Washington.
And of course, President Yoon said on Monday that the missile and nuclear threat from North Korea continues to grow day by day. And while South Korea and the US, they fired 8 missiles in response to North Korea's provocation in the very early hours of Monday. And well, what do you make of this response, and how do you think North Korea is going to react?
Well, as you mentioned, the two allies, South Korea and the U.S., fired 8 ballistic missiles into the Eastern Sea in response to the most recent North Korea's missile provocations. And the South Korean military announced that the allies launched the ground-to-ground Army tactical missile system, which is called ATACMS missiles, from an eastern coastal region in Gangwon province. They're starting at 4:45 a.m., very early morning, for around 10 minutes. And the military said that the allies shooting the missiles demonstrated the capability and posture to launch immediate precision strikes on the origins of provocations and their command and support forces. And it also shows that Pyongyang's military provocations will be met with corresponding reactions. Meanwhile, personally, I expect that North Korea will be silent about the allies' response, and it will just go ahead to conduct another provocation following its own plan. And considering that North Korea needed to conduct the nuclear test for the tactical nuclear warheads and shoot another ICBM for technological advancements, the Pyongyang will make another serious provocation in the coming weeks. So I expect that the security situation on the Korean Peninsula will become more grave in the coming weeks and months.
And well, with the security situation becoming more dire, as you said, not only for South Korea, but also neighbouring Japan as well, how is Seoul beefing up its missile defence and weapons capability against the North? And going further than that, what is your recommendation?
Well, it is known that the new South Korean government is trying to strengthen the extended deterrence and combine the defense posture of South Korea and U.S. in response to North Korea's repeated provocations. Specifically, it is reported that recently President Yoon Suk-yeol ordered the readiness posture be firmly maintained at all times, and the continued strengthening of the South Korea-U.S. extended deterrence and combined defense posture, including missile defense exercises between South Korea and U.S. So it is expected that South Korea will work more closely with the U.S. and their military cooperation will get strengthened in the coming months. So it is very likely that a large-scale joint military exercises will come back, and the U.S. strategic assets will be more frequently deployed over the Korean Peninsula. So basically, I think it's necessary for South Korean government to firmly respond to North Korean provocations. But I also think that South Korean government needed to have a diplomatic way to stably manage the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. It requires South Korea's facilitating role to resume the North Korea-U.S. nuclear talks, and it also needs South Korea to play a major role in making progress for North Korea's denuclearization. So I hope personally that the South Korean government will be ready to play a major role in resuming the nuclear talks between the North Korea and U.S. because there is also a possibility that North Korea might come back to the negotiating table toward the end of this year, after the completing its military build-up in terms of the repeated military provocations.
And until then, do you think perhaps President Joe Biden in the US is going to be perhaps a little distracted with more domestic affairs, especially with the key elections coming up in November?
Well, there is also a possibility that the U.S. will consider the domestic political situations. But think about what factors could affect the results of the upcoming midterm elections in the United States. Of course, the domestic matters like the economy, the unemployment rates, and other things, the economic the indicators, factors, could make the biggest impact on the results of the midterm elections. But of course, the foreign policy issues like the how to deal with the Ukraine crisis and how to complete the nuclear talks with Iran and how to effectively compete with the China in terms of the strategic competition and how to cope with the North Korea's nuclear threat on the United States. So if the United States or the Biden administration will succeed in the making progress, the talking with North Korea in terms of its denuclearization, and the American voters, U.S. voters, may buy that kind of the accomplishments when they go to the voting booth or in this upcoming November election. So I think that the Biden administration will make its efforts to make the all kinds of accomplishments that they can do toward the end of this year to have the better results in terms of the midterm election in this November.
And how do you think Joe Biden is really going to approach this North Korea agenda, though, with him really pursuing foreign policy for the middle class? Do you think maybe South Korea and Japan will see a more significant advancement in their defense capabilities?
Yeah, basically, I agree with your opinion that the Biden administration will be focused on the enhancing or strengthening its tie with the South Korea and Japan in terms of the increasing its the military capabilities against North Korea and for long term the China. So it's not easy to expect that the Biden administration will soon come back to the negotiating table with North Korea because as I mentioned, the Biden administration is focused on the strengthening its tie with its key allies in East Asia, South Korea and Japan. So it means that the Biden administration will focus on managing North Korean problems, North Korean nuclear threats, and just try to show the strengthening tie or the better the relationship with its the key allies, South Korea and Japan. So it means that it would not be easy to see the U.S. and the North Korea just will come back to the negotiating table and talk about the denuclearization process to achieve the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But as I mentioned earlier today, there is also a possibility that North Korea want to come back to the negotiating table after achieving or its military buildup or after enhancing its bargaining power on U.S.
I suppose the ball is in the North Court. And, well, lastly, we saw in the Biden-Yoon joint declaration about we saw the mention of the possibility of placing strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula. But do you think we'll hear more talk about the possibility of tactical weapons being placed here?
Well, we need to see whether the Biden administration will actually put the tactical weapons on the Korean Peninsula, because the many experts say that having the tactical weapons on the Korean Peninsula will not resolve the nuclear threats posed by North Korea. So far, the many experts agree that putting just the tactical weapons and placing the strategic assets on the U.S. territory like the Guam or Hawaii should be enough to show the extended deterrence against North Korean the nuclear threat. And if the South Korea decides and the allies decide to put the tactical weapons on the Korean Peninsula, it will make the security situation on the Korean Peninsula more grave, mainly in terms of the concerns by China and Russia, like the powers surrounding the Korean Peninsula. So if we consider those factors all together, and we can see that putting the tactical weapons on the Korean Peninsula could have many advantages or the good benefits than not putting those kind of tactical the weapons, the warheads on the Korean Peninsula. So of course there is a possibility to do that, but personally I think that such kind of probability could be low in terms of putting the tactical weapons on the Korean Peninsula. We will see.
Well, certainly nobody would want the situation to escalate in the region. And, well, this is where we'll have to end the interview today. That was Min Jong-un, Professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you very much, Professor, for your time today.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson survived a confidence vote on Monday, but was backed by just 59% of Conservative Party lawmakers. 148 lawmakers from his party voted against him. For Johnson to be removed, at least 180 votes were needed out of the 359 Conservative members of Parliament. The vote follows the Partygate scandal, where numerous parties were held in Downing Street while the rest of the UK was in lockdown, sparking national outrage. The PM was fined by police over the scandal for breaking COVID lockdown rules. Elon Musk has threatened to terminate his $44 billion deal to acquire Twitter after accusing the company of breaching their agreement. Musk's lawyers, in a letter to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, said that Twitter hasn't provided enough information about the number of fake users on the platform. They said Musk believes the company has resisted his rights to access data and information from the company under the takeover agreement, as he hasn't received information that he has repeatedly requested since May 9th. They also warned that the Tesla CEO has reserved his rights under the agreement, including his right to walk away and, quote, terminate it. Thousands of migrants on Monday started their journey toward the U.S. from the southern Mexico town of Tapachula. The timing of their trek coincides with the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, taking place this week, where U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to announce a regional pact on migration. According to migration activists, the group may be one of the largest migrant caravans to leave from the region in recent years, with eyewitness accounts estimating around 6,000 people. Made up mostly of Venezuelans, Central Americans and Cubans, the group represents people attempting to flee poverty and violence in their home countries. Ahead of World Oceans Day on June 8th, international marine conservation organizations removed over 23.5 metric tons of waste from the seas around the Greek island of Ithaca. The cleanup took place over the last 2 weeks with volunteer divers from the UK, Netherlands, Lebanon, Hungary and Greece. They cleared dozens of abandoned heavy fishing nets from the seabed. This will be recycled into yarn to make products such as clothing and carpets. According to environmentalists, roughly 640,000 tons of fishing gear is lost or abandoned in the oceans each year. On Sunday, thousands of rowers crowded the canals of Venice for the city's Vogolonga Regatta. Setting off from St. Mark's Basin, around 7,000 rowers in over 1,700 boats took part in the 30-kilometer-long rowing marathon. Since the first regatta in 1974, the number of participants has steadily increased, and it features different types of rowing boats celebrating the spirit of the event. The regatta had been held virtually in 2022 and scaled down in 2021 due to the pandemic. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Well, it's a pleasant start to the day in the capital under clear blue skies, but rain is falling in eastern parts of Gangwon-do and Jeollado provinces this morning. Then rain will gradually spread to the rest of the country in the afternoon with 5 to 30 millimeters of rainfall expected through tonight. But thankfully, the dry weather advisory has all been lifted. Along with clouds and rain, temperatures will not rise that much, hovering a couple of degrees below season norms, so it's going to be a comfortable day in the capital area, but breezier over in the south. It's a refreshing but a bit of tiring start to the day after a 3-day weekend. Morning lows are starting in the mid-teens in most parts. Daegu at 14 degrees, Busan at 15 degrees. Then highs in Daegu and Gwangju will go up to just 22 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Decent air quality expected nationwide all day today. Then passing rain is in the forecast tomorrow for Jeollado and south of Gangwon-do province. Then things will heat up again as the week goes on. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe. And that wraps up our newscast for this hour, but we'll be back tomorrow for our Wednesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks for tuning in this morning, but stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, take care.
Thank you.